explore this new model of learning, and it's allowing for cross-school collaboration, which is really cool. The event is modeled after professional conferences, but is offered to students. The conference provides an opportunity to work with students in new ways, allowing their interests and curiosities to drive our programming while engaging community partners in a non-traditional day of learning. For this year, I chose to help out at HP Clough over in Mendon. I'm going to be helping out at a photography workshop for some of the kids over there. And I remember last year I had a lot of fun. I worked at a mock Model UN event, and I enjoyed that a lot. So next up we have the winter concert. The winter concert took place last week with our talented musicians and chorus folks, and as always was a wonderful tribute to the talent here at Nipmuc. This Wednesday there will be a school-wide concert for our students to enjoy some songs of the season and have a chance to listen and cheer on some of their peers. Furthermore, we had the One Acts recently. Nipmuc Drama hosted the One Acts last weekend, and they were a huge success this year, drawing a wonderful crowd. All of the students did a great job and put a lot of work into making this night a success. A big thank you to Mrs. O'Brien and Mr. Diamond for stepping in as two of the judges. We are always looking forward to the holidays, and winter break is just a few days away. I will be looking forward to some much needed rest and relaxation over the break, and happy holidays to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy
Thank you very much,
holidays,
Nolan.
everyone.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. You as well.
All right, next on the agenda, community comments. Anybody have comments from the community? Seeing none, let's move on. Superintendent's comments.
All right, well, good evening, everybody. First item that I have is some really, really good news that we've gotten in the last 2 to 3 weeks. The fact that our district is one of 22 finalists across the state for the Kaleidoscope Collective for Learning. I think over a couple school committee meetings I've kind of given you an update. I think either the last one or the meeting before I give you a copy of the application. But I think it's very impressive that we're at this place. You know, as I say in the background notes, there was about 500 schools that filed an initial letter of intent during the summertime, and a total of 330 filed applications, so one of 22 finalists. And the background behind it is to really explore deeper learning, but explore methodologies other than traditional state assessments to really get the heart of meaningful learning. And the vision is to have, I think Commissioner Riley is really the person triumphing this, is to have some type of performance-based task that's done in a group setting to be some type of alternative to a traditional MCAS test. And actually for the participants in this initial cohort, they're actually putting out there a waiver from the MCAS science exam in grades 5, 8, and 9 for this spring, which I think is really remarkable as far as just kind of a good faith type move. We're real super excited. We feel like the work and the vision of this cohort group is very much aligned with the work that we're already engaged in here within the district. One of the things that they're very much promoting is that all of the schools and districts have some type of portrait of a learner type competencies that we've worked on. So we have two final tasks to be considered a full-fledged cohort member. One is during the month of January. They're going to conduct a school visit, and we've chosen as a focal school Nipmuc Regional High School because a lot of the work that is already ongoing, some of which John and Marianne are going to talk about tonight with regard to learning adventures. But the second is they want to see that each school and district hold a community event to talk about deeper learning to kind of involve all stakeholders, staff, parents, students in this conversation to show support. So we've done some initial planning, and we've targeted January 16th to be the date that we will have this event. It will be open to all, but we'll also be looking to invite some key stakeholders. As I say in my background notes, I think because this is so important, and I think it's very, very tightly aligned with the vision of the district and the vision of our strategic plan, and also knowing that we potentially have a very challenging budget cycle coming up for FY21. I think to plant our proverbial stake in the ground and to show the level of importance of this, I think we would do really well to have this as a full school committee meeting. I believe it was 2 years ago when we did the screening of Most Likely to Succeed, and we had the online chat with Ted Dintersmith. We did the same thing. So it would be my recommendation that we do the same thing on that date. Any questions or thoughts regarding that?
Wow.
I think it's a good thing.
Well,
I
so
really do.
last time we had the meeting was we were just a final, or
We
final?
had just
What was the
submitted, it was a
terminology?
really quick turnaround time. So to put things in perspective, I believe the application was due November 1st, and they let us know on something like, it was right around Thanksgiving time. So it was a very, very quick turnaround. And I think the fact that we had done so much work around Portrait of a Learner, the fact that the different initiatives that we've been involved in as a district and really trying to push practice really spoke well to our application.
So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. So
Yeah, it's a good thing.
I'm very happy about
It's a
this.
really, really good thing. I was fully expecting that the waiver piece we wouldn't be looking at that until the spring of '21. So it was kind of a nice, pleasant surprise.
Yep.
Second piece that I have is just a friendly reminder that tomorrow, seeing if we do not have a cancellation day, as I'm looking at my superintendent text chain flashing across my laptop right now, there will be a blood drive. The Nipmuc students in the Red Cross Club are hosting a blood drive tomorrow. I believe, Leslie, we're going a little bit later with the start of that, correct?
Yes, it's going to start at 9:30.
Instead of 8 o'clock,
yes.
in lieu of a potential delay or something to that effect.
And I'll communicate with them in the morning if you make a determination that there's
Sure.
no school.
Sure. So this is something that is terrific. The Kraft Family Blood Donor Center out of Brigham and Women's and Dana-Farber Hospital are hosting this event. They will come to Nipmuc by the side of the school with their mobile van and run the blood drive right out of there. So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie, again, that our target is a minimum of 30 pints to be collected, correct?
Yes, they'd like to collect that. We have more than half of that registered, and we're hoping there's some community members as well. If people can walk in from the street.
Sure.
And some students that, I think there were some field trips that had some changes for tomorrow because of the weather, so that opens it up to other students that weren't able to donate. So we should hopefully be close to that target.
Super. Okay. So if you can come out, please give your blood. Speaking of inclement weather, just I added this in my report again, and I think I put in your packet the memo from DESE that this is the last year to do ASL or alternative structured learning days by districts that already had approved plans. I communicated out to our families and also to staff last week. I'm going to be 100% honest. I wasn't anticipating 2 snow days on December 1st and December 2nd. And I believe right now that we are at December 17th for our final day of this school year. So it is something that we will use judiciously. You know, as always, you know, we have information posted on our district website, and I will be very explicit in communication of it. Okay? And last but not least, you should have in your packet the most current year-to-date expenditure report for FY 2020. Jay, is there anything that you'd like to comment upon?
I think we're proceeding as expected. I can't honestly sit here tonight and tell you that snow and ice is looking pretty good anymore. I'm being less optimistic by the day. But outside of that, we just continue to be, you know, hit with maintenance issues. I think I mentioned last time, if I didn't, I will now, that we have to replace what's called the fire annunciator panel at Memorial School. Our concern is not so much doing that, but the one at Clough was put in the exact same time and it's the exact same make, so we're expecting that to start to have some issues as well. That fire suppression pump that we talked about at our budget meeting last week has developed a couple of new issues, so we're going to be accelerating replacing that probably sooner rather than later. And then lastly, not related to this report, we did go out to bid for our bus contract. The bids are due back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I can tell you that I emailed it out to about 6 or 7 different companies and got no response from anybody and got no requests for the bid package with the exception of one company that leases and sells buses, and he shows up at every bus bid contract because he knows he's going to make money. So we'll see what we get tomorrow. We didn't do any pre-bid conference, but tomorrow morning we'll find out what our bids are on that. That's it.
All right, cool. All right, so next on the agenda is the administrator's comments. Move Learning Adventure Grant. John Samarian and Moran.
Great, everybody, how are you? Thanks for the chance to share the update on Learning Adventures. It's been about a year or so we've been working on the idea of Learning Adventures, and we're seeing a lot of progress this year. So we thought we would give you an update on the MUF grant portion of it. But I'm going to start with a question. So ask each of you to think to yourself, what was your most powerful moment of learning from high school? Don't have to answer it right now. Like I said, we've been working on this for about a year or so, but in the past month we each read a book called The Power of Moments, and they talk about a variation of this question. They've done research and they look back, and if you're anything like the people in the research study, they find that people remember most frequently being on stage in a performance, the big game, or prom. Those kinds of things stands out. But for the most part, research says to us that the moments that are most memorable from our learning do not take place in the classroom. And that's despite the amount of work and effort and the great teachers and the kids who are already working really hard. The moments are happening outside of that. And it sort of breaks down the alchemy of those moments that makes them memorable and meaningful. I won't put you on the spot and ask you for your moment, whether that happened in the classroom, but I will say when we read that book, the idea of learning adventures came to us because it asked the question, what if we could create learning moments in our schools that were as memorable as the prom? And I think learning adventures is one of the ways we're taking a stab at that. We've been, since last year, playing with this idea and put a lot more effort into it this year. We had a lead learner workshop earlier in the year where we're building a common definition of what a learning adventure is. So what are the components that make it up? What is that alchemy that makes it memorable and meaningful and relevant to the real world? And then, in addition to that, all of our teachers this year are working to create a learning adventure that captures the best parts of the inspired learning days that Owen was talking about, but makes a direct, explicit, meaningful connection to the curriculum. So those moments are starting to be created, co-created with kids over the course of the year. So in playing with learning adventures, another way that we decided to explore it was by looking at how they tie to the portrait of the learner, how they help bring those 6 competencies to life. And the idea of what if we put a team of kids together from middle, elementary, and high school? What if we added students and teachers together from those 3 levels, and we gave them the chance to go on an adventure? And then look at how it connects to the curriculum, and look at how it connects to the portrait of the learner. And Learning Adventures grant is something that MUF supported us with, and we're really excited about the direction that it's going.
Great, so we're kind of partway into it at this point in the year. This was our timeline that we put together. end of last year when we put the grant forward. So thinking about early fall, coming together, talk about what learning adventures are. So we did that and we learned workshops, and then establishing the team. We had a lot of applicants from each of the schools, which was really exciting. And as educators, we never like to have to choose some students and not all students. So that was tough, but through a blind process at each of the schools, trying ensuring some consistency across grade levels, we were able to select the team. As Joe mentioned, there were 4 students from each of the elementary schools. Those were 4th graders. We had 8 middle schoolers and 8 high schoolers, and then teacher representatives from every level. And then in November, we got together on November 22nd for our first day. So off of this page, there's another page that kind of captured all of our learning for that day. So we thought we'd walk you through some of the activities we did together. It was quite a day. This is our team right here. We had a lot of fun together and received a lot of positive feedback from each of the students. But we'll talk a little bit about each of the activities and then sum it up. So before they even came to us, we kind of tapped into the unique personalities that were going to make up our learning adventure team, and we asked them to pick a song that would be part of our learning adventure playlist. So this was the music we played over the course of the day. So every student and faculty member chose a song. So that is what made up this playlist, which is a whole lot of fun. All the way, You Need to Calm Down, Break Free, Dark Side, 2002, but these played throughout the day, so kids thought that was a neat way to jump right in and kind of have a little piece of them as part of the team. You want to talk about Life Raft?
Yeah, I mean, the whole day is kind of sort of a celebration of what comes up in our strategic plan, the idea that everyone in our school district is learners. It's not just the students, it's not just the teachers, we all can work together. And so we wanted, as our main goals of the day, to give that group of a wide age span the chance to come together as a team. And then in addition to that, a chance to really explore and become experts with the Portrait of the Learner. So we started with the Life Raft Survival, where in order to get everybody working together, we broke them up into 6 groups, one per Portrait of the Learner competency. And to get everybody feeling like they're on the same page, we had life rafts of blankets on the floor in our media center, where you had administrators and teachers sitting on the floor right next with 4th graders, middle school, and high school. So they were all in the same boat, metaphorically and literally, working together in order to figure out how they wanted to take on this challenge. The idea was you're out in the middle of the sea, you've got time to grab 10 items from your boat in order to survive, and then what's your list? So with whiteboards, they made their list. We adapted this protocol, and the original protocol, you match it up to see if you got all the things that the Coast Guard recommended. We gave the groups the list that the Coast Guard had and said, okay, cross all of those off your list in order to push them not to come up with the accepted normal solutions, but to get out of the box and get in that innovative mindset of coming up with new, different ways to solve these problems. And then we said, okay, now you get one item connected to your Portrait of the Learner competency. So very quickly they were talking, having conversation, all in the same boat, thinking in an innovator's mindset, and then beyond that, becoming experts in their individual competencies with the Portrait of the Learner.
So that was a neat way to kick it off, and it was so neat to hear elementary students talking about why we took away those things that the Coast Guard wanted, right? Pushing their thinking, getting them to think outside of the box. For many of our students and our learners, this is the first time they're thinking about learning adventures or digging deep into the Portrait of the Learner. So we had the challenge of kind of educating them and figuring out what those competencies were, but then kind of forming as a team as well. So the second activity, they dove in together. They kept the same teams that they were on the life raft with, and the same competencies, because we wanted them to dig a little deeper, and did a picture this activity, which is kind of like a freeze frame. We didn't know how this one was going to go, but at the end of the day, as they were processing, this was some of their most favorite parts of the day. And they had to visually represent their Portrait of a Learner competency. So if they were the Global Citizen team, they had to come up with a way to visually represent that in a freeze frame. So no talking, no moving. They had all kinds of props. They had costumes and hats and props and makerspace things. They had paper. They got creative. We're in the media center, so some used books. And did a freeze frame. So every group went up, did their freeze frame. We took a picture of it and then explained kind of how what they were doing was a representation of the skills embedded in that competency. So they all had their own interpretations of it, but involved all of the learners, and for a lot of them stepping out of their comfort zone. As we really dug into the Portrait of Learner competency, you'll see these here, we talked about the competencies as superpowers for the elementary students, but connected just the same with the high school students. So thinking about those skills that are embedded in each of the competencies as the superpowers that are going to propel our kids to be successful in the future, right? As they leave us and head off into the world, these are your superpowers that are going to carry you. So when you think of students being effective communicators or skillful collaborators, we know as educators that those are the skills that they need, but trying to put it in terms that elementary and middle and high school students can understand as the powers they need to find success in whatever they choose to do. So this was when we really started to talk about if these are the superpowers that you are going to need as you move forward, then what are ways that you can practice these superpowers? So this is where we started to brainstorm some of those ideas of learning adventures within, again, that competency that they were becoming experts in. So if they were part of the effective communicator group, they were thinking in terms of learning adventures that would help them become more effective communicators. It would help them develop and practice those skills. So we dug in a bunch to that. This was our brainstorming portion. So after that, then they went around and brainstormed everything. How many ideas do you think we get out? The Post-it notes were flying during this portion of it.
A couple hundred.
Yeah, at least. So, and some of the most creative ideas, things that I wouldn't have thought of, but once you give students and learners the freedom to think outside the box and not in the traditional box that we consider school, all kinds of things came up during that time. And then we took all those ideas and played a would you rather game. So we paired ideas up, so every student had the opportunity, every learner I should say, because the adults too, had the opportunity to go and pull their favorite idea off. So we had to get from the hundreds of ideas down to a set that we were going to compare. So everyone got to be sure that at least one of their ideas was in the mix for the would you rather game, and then we started pairing up the ideas. So two students or learners would come together, they'd have their two ideas. Would you rather, one of the ideas that floated to the top was to build a Zoom-usement park. I don't even know what that is. We're still gonna work on figuring that one out next time, right? So build a Zoom-usement park, or, what was another one? Go kayaking, so, and they pair those two ideas up and they'd award them smiley faces based on, which one they liked better. So that helped us kind of filter ideas. So at this point, we're down to about, I don't know, I think 8 or 9 top ideas. We didn't want to narrow it any further than that. We thought we'd give some time and space, and then when we come back together in February, it's going to be taking their initial 8 or 9 ideas and really boiling it down to where they want to go next with that, what their adventure is going to look like. So there's going to be some planning, some connecting with experts, some thinking about how it really ties into the Portrait of Learner and what we want that adventure to look like.
Maybe scroll to the slides so it shows we wrap it up.
Sure.
So it was, you'll get a sense of the day just by looking at some of these pictures, but it was amazing. The team building happened very, very quickly, and I think something about a little bit of competition in a small group where everyone's pulling in the same direction really helped. But everybody contributed, from the youngest students to our faculty members. We had a ton of fun with the day. At lunchtime, we brought in ping pong tables, and you saw juniors playing ping pong with 4th graders, having a good time. But they did become very quickly experts on the Portrait of the Learner. They were able to talk knowledgeably about the competencies, and all the information that they were using was info that came out of the workshop we ran with students and teachers, graduates, and middle schoolers last December, where we created the I can statements, and we built sort of the framework of how we would think about the Portrait of the Learner. So as Marianne said, now that we have all the ideas, is to get them together in February, turn their ideas into an action plan where we look at budgets and look at practicalities, connections to the curriculum, explicit connections to the Portrait of the Learner, and then begin that planning stage to make sure that the adventure looks great when it happens in the spring. This group is a group you'll hear from again. We're hoping to have them involved at the Kaleidoscope session on January 16th. We'd love to have them come back and share their adventure with you in the spring, in May or June, at a meeting where they can talk about what they experienced and how this model worked for them, or the challenges they faced, and what we can learn from it moving forward.
One of the, as we were wrapping up, we were commenting that day, just to hear all of our learners talking about the portrait of the learner in the language of the portrait of the learner, understanding the competencies and skills built within that. So the excitement of having such a short period of time with them, but getting them to the point where they can gain this understanding of what it is and why it's so critically important to the education that's in front of them. So that was a pretty exciting portion of the day. What we got?
Very cool.
Yeah.
Particularly wonderful in just the structure of that whole breadth of 9, 10 grades of students together with each other. And it really makes you think about how the way we sort children, by grade levels, by age, and so on. And to see these kids blending together and working together, like John and Marianne described, is really, really powerful. So kudos, great start.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can't wait for what you said, tie it back into the actual learning adventure. They know, I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, that's a critical part, right? To show how you can bring the curriculum to life through this and how it connects to the portrait. Without that, it's a fun day, and that's worthwhile too, but
Yep.
gotta have that connection.
Is there a plan to present those learning adventures again, obviously?
Yeah, and it'll be just one big adventure for the entire group where they all have different roles, they'll all be on it together,
Oh,
but then
okay.
they'll come back and it'll be like a showcase of learning where we show those explicit connections. We have one more half day planned with them before that showcase where we're gonna be building some sort of digital portfolio that everyone can contribute to and highlight some of their learning.
Cool.
Yeah, so one of the slides has it, they have ideas about outdoors adventures, they really are interested in the idea of escape room or building an escape room in district. The Zoo Amusement Park came up, so they've got a lot of it doing, community service work, building a house, they have all kinds of awesome ideas, so it'll just kind of be meshing them or determining which ones the group wants to go for, so.
I mean, this looks amazing, and this may be a little premature, but what is the vision for going forward, rolling this out to more than just this pilot group, assuming that everything goes well, which there's no reason to think that it won't. But.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're excited about this because it embraces this as a district-wide endeavor, shows that we're all learners, and shows how quickly you can become experts of it. When we tried it, we didn't necessarily know, even planning the workshop. We planned for adults and we planned for kids. We never planned for such a wide span, so it was super fun, but a big challenge to plan it. What we're excited about in particular, I mean, our teachers are working really hard on this, and this is something that they are going to be embedding in the courses. We've had inspired learning days, which are great, but sometimes they feel separate from the curriculum, so to embed it in the curriculum is really exciting. What we're looking forward to doing is embedding it in the program of studies, where for every class that we have, you would be able to see the learning adventure that is tied to it, so that if I'm an 8th grader entering high school, I can look at the portrait of the learner competencies and go, okay, looking at my 4-year plan, I'm going to plan the courses that help me achieve who I think I am or who I want to be with the portrait of the learner. Our goal is to create a digital catalog of these that can be embedded to kind of look like the App Store with pictures of it, or description of what it looks like, some reviews from people who were part of it, and if you like this adventure, Vicki, you might also like these 3 other ones that are related to it, so that it brings it to life in a really accessible way that kind of goes along with the district's idea of choice and agency and deep learning. I think it's a reflection of all of that. But we couldn't do it without the teachers putting all the time and work into it, so they helped us in early part of the year coming up with the definition at a relearn workshop. They're now exploring them. You go ahead, Mary.
No, I was just gonna say, so this is the work that they've been doing in terms of, what is a learning adventure, right? That was important for us to define as a school community. So there's just a lot of awesome practice built within this, right? It's a reflection of NIMUC's beliefs about learning and our definition of learning. So it's guided by our beliefs and our values at NIMUC. It's aligned to the portrait of a learner, which we know is critically important. It's connected to the curriculum, right? Those state frameworks that we have is important. Co-constructed, meaning kids are a part of the construction of it. We're listening to our learners as we're building those non-traditionals in there, and we talked about this one, whether, we'll look back on that and be like, that's so funny, we thought that was non-traditional at the time, but the idea of this outside of the box thinking and fun when we look at it, generates excitement from students, right? These are the things we want in all learning. So while we call them adventures now, I think my ultimate hope is we look back in 10 years and it's just learning, right? So now we're thinking a little bit more outside of the box than we typically have. But I think we will look back, I'm confident, and say, oh wow, we thought of those things as something unique at the time, but it's just what learning looks like now. So, and this is deep inquiry, student agency, very much aligned to project-based learning and all the values that are embedded there as well. So pretty exciting that, they worked through this, came up with these definitions, and so we'll work through the process this year, constructing them and iterating. And, the hope is that it spreads, kids get excited about the learning and teachers get excited about the teaching, and, we build more and more of them as the years go on, so.
So I really like how you framed it at the beginning, what is your most meaningful learning experience? I'm wondering if you thought about how that can be translated into, I'm really just reflecting my own personal pain right now. I apologize for this, but any way that you can start building the materials that are necessary to go to the next step beyond high school, which may be college, where you're writing essays about your most meaningful experiences and how you've gained the kind of experience and knowledge about who you want to be. It seems like this is a very good platform for getting kids to think about that, especially how they move forward.
Right.
And maybe not the elementary school kids,
Sure.
but the high school kids should certainly be thinking about that.
Yeah, and that's why when we created the tool that helps people self-assess where they're going with these learning adventures, we didn't put exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, warning. It is the prompts on them are what if and I wonder. Because I think you're right, this is about not an endpoint, but cultivating your story, cultivating your personal narrative, and seeing how the things you do every day help you grow, get better, and be successful in the world beyond campus. So a lot of this is just about mindset, right? Having the mindset of continuous growth, having the mindset of finding the learning in these key moments, and not doing things from a compliance standpoint.
Yep.
And like you said, it's completely compatible with the work of the Kaleidoscope Collective cohort
Yeah.
to go hand in glove.
Yeah, very cool. All right, next subject, subcommittee meeting subcommittee updates. The superintendent's evaluation subcommittee.
So I'll fill in. I think this is the last piece that still needs to be discussed, because I believe at our last time we met on November 18th, the committee formally approved my plan for the 1920 school year. But one of the last pieces left hanging was about the use of the new pilot streamlined superintendent's rubric, which I shared with you at that meeting. I believe it's also in your packet for tonight. And kind of having a discussion around the use of that streamlined rubric that has 21 indicators. However, the recommendation of highlighting or targeting 6 to 8 of those indicators as kind of focal points for the yearly evaluation. So also, as I say in my background notes, I think it was right around the beginning of this month, Sean and I had the opportunity to go to kind of a quick workshop that was co-sponsored by the Superintendent's Association and the School Committee Association that kind of gave a background around how superintendent evaluation is changing, and talked a little bit about this rubric and its use. And again, it doesn't have to be used, but based upon our discussion at the subcommittee level, felt it could be something that would be interesting and it could streamline the process. So as I say in the background notes, I've reflected upon it a lot, and particularly in looking at what my professional practice and student learning goals, along with the prioritized district strategic goals. I've put down there the targeted areas around assessment, data-informed decision-making, fiscal systems, engagement, communication internally, but also communication externally to the community, and also a shared vision as 7 of the targeted indicators for the evaluation. If you look at the actual indicators and the verbiage in the rubric around those 7, they really are highly aligned with what I feel like are my goal areas for 1920, specifically as a refresher, looking at the use of data that addresses the disparity in some of the MCAS performance between the 2 elementary schools, the work around assessment, and again, going back to the Kaleidoscope Collective and the work that needs to be done around performance-based tasks in the context of project-based learning. Fiscal systems and communication, I think that and engagement directly speaks to some of the challenges that we have in ensuring that we have appropriate resources through this district. And the shared vision I also see highly aligned with the communication, but also in furthering the many ideas and the many visions of our strategic plan. So those are my ideas with regard to what I'd like to see moving forward for an evaluation next fall around those 7 targeted areas. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
And just to add a little bit to that, I think from the presentation that we had of in Marlboro is, it was, we are doing a lot of what they were recommending
Exactly.
already. We're doing probably 95% of what they recommended. So there were many people there that were all trying to understand how they do their evaluations, and they were following the guidelines from DESE. So there were a lot of school districts that needed improvement for how they were doing their superintendent evaluations. But this was the change. What Joe has illustrated in these areas, they gave a list of a lot of areas, indicators that you would use to judge each area of the superintendent's evaluation. These are the ones that Joe has chosen to align properly with ours. So I think what they're doing, I think, is helpful. Yeah, some of the districts aren't quite there yet, but I think we're on track for doing the right thing for what we're doing, I believe.
Well, I think the 7 indicators that you pulled out are spot on, aligned with goals, and so that seems like where we should be focusing.
Cool. Okay. Good. Moving on, budget subcommittee. Phil's not here, so.
Yeah, so just plain and simple, last week on the 10th, we had a deeper dive into the topic of buildings and grounds. That meeting was held here at MISCO. The next one is tentatively January 7th. I may be changing that, or I'll consult Phil. The topic is elementary school programs. Seeing that we're getting very close to having the first pass of the budget, I believe the second meeting that we have in January, which will be, let's see, I could do some quick math, 6 and 14, the 20th, or actually that might be Martin Luther King Day. It's either the 20th or the 27th. We will have the presentation of the first pass of the budget. So we'll probably combine initial estimates with the elementary school programs. But it's good just to go deeper dive to see what the programmatic needs are and build the budget based upon that.
Yeah, very good. And I think the last meeting we covered was specific around the grounds and the school buildings and what the budget was necessary to maintain those. So as you recall, we've been going through in a systematic way to cover all of the different areas of the budget as we go through our budget subcommittee meetings. And at the next one, we'll probably have more general information as Joe just said. So moving on from there, unless there are any questions, concerns, highlights? Moving on from there, we have new business, the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey results.
Okay. This is something that we do every 2 years. We have been administering this every 2 years since 2012. And as we talk about it, and it's always kind of a component of our annual action plans, we really use this as kind of a marker, one of many markers that kind of speak to the social emotional health of our kids. So this was administered about a year ago in November of 2018. Please realize we don't get the results back until something like August. So it takes a while for them to get all the information because they are benchmarked against the other Metro West districts as well as the state and also national data. So I'm going to apologize in advance. I have 47, count them, yes, 47 slides here. That is just beyond ridiculous. So some of these I'm going to go very, very rapidly through. Otherwise, we'll be here till 10 o'clock. And Dorothy, you look very tired. You're still beautiful, but tired. So you see there what the mission is, and it mirrors the CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And the survey question, you can see what it gets into: substance use, violence and bullying, unintentional injuries, sexual behaviors for the high school students only, mental health, which is more and more prevalent, some of the questions they're asking, physical activity, nutrition and weight, risk behaviors, and probably what I think is some of the most protective things, important things that we have control over in our schools is protective factors. And I think it's really important that, yes, this is a snapshot of the work that's going on at the secondary level, but it's also a snapshot of our community. There's many questions in here that are asked of our kids that, are reflective of what's happening in the homes. So you see there the number of questions for high school kids, the number of questions for middle school kids. It is administered 6 through 8. However, a lot of questions that the 7th and 8th graders get, the 6th graders do not, particularly around substance abuse. So you see there our response rate, it's in that 89 to 90%, so it's very, very good. And you see statistically, it's quite a few high schools and districts here in the Metro West area. If you do participate, you are eligible for grant funding for various programs that the Health Foundation puts on throughout the year. So I did choose a lot of slides, and I'm more than, you literally could probably pull about 600 slides from all the data that they give you. So it was super selective in the things that I felt were the most salient, that kind of tell a story about our kids at the high school and the middle school levels. But the data is disaggregated by grade, by sex, by school versus region versus state versus the national trends, and then also looking at our data since every 2 years since 2012. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different looks, but if I had to summarize in a few bullet points of what the data tells us is there is some good news as far as positive trends over that 6-year span as far as the amount kids are using substances, both just once in their lifetime or current or habitually. Cigarette smoking is almost nil. We're talking like 1%, 2%. But just like we're seeing across the nation, vaping is really becoming a big concern. We're generally seeing a lot of success with regard to bullying and cyberbullying and less instances of it, and more kids stepping up and doing the right thing as far as stand-by behaviors. But as I said before, what we're starting to see is more instances of stress, more instances of anxiety, and the resources that we need that address these effectively. I think something that we do have control over, that we have a couple slides that speak to it, is the protective factor of students feeling like they belong and they have a niche and a real strong connection to the school. And then this year, for the first time, they went a little deeper in questions about student sleep and the use of social media. And I think some of the results are a little bit surprising, at least they surprised me. So very quickly, substance abuse data. What I'll do is I'll show you the 3-year trends for Nipmuc and then also for Misco Hill. What you can see here is that first is around cigarette smoking. The second is around current use of alcohol. And then the next one is current use of marijuana. By current use, they define it, have you used the substance within the last 30 days? Sorry about that. And as you can see, like I said, the cigarette smoking is down to about 3%. And current alcohol use is about 23%, and then marijuana use is around 27%. If we look at 7th and 8th graders at Misco Hill, hold on a second, I've got an issue with my MacBook. Do you mind plugging that in, please? Thank you. Thank you, Tori. So if you look at Misco students, cigarette smoking in the last 30 days, 1%, drinking 3%, marijuana use 1%. So super, super low. And then if you go to lifetime use, you see this basically, the question is, have you ever used any of these substances ever in your entire life? 13% for smoking, 55% for alcohol, and 37% for marijuana. So as you can see, with at least the cigarettes and with the alcohol, it's been a slight decline. With marijuana, I would probably characterize it as static, which is kind of interesting based upon now we're in year 3 of legalization across the state. Trends in lifetime use for middle school students, again, you can see they're very, very low with regard to smoking a cigarette and using of marijuana. And have they ever drank alcohol? 13%. And again, trends over time with other substances. Kind of interesting that bar on the left, you see a drop in use of prescription drugs, and actually I should say misuse of prescription drugs, ones that weren't prescribed to you. You can see ecstasy, heroin, and also cocaine, also super low for high school students. And then alcohol use, you see a trend. Have you drank within the last 30 days? A downward trend since 2002 from 42% to 29%. Also a downward trend in binge drinking in the last 30 days to 17%. Were you drunk in the last 30 days? Also a downward trend to 20%. And then also used marijuana and alcohol at the same time in the last 30 days, also a downward trend to 23%. However, as like I said before, the flip side is around vaping, where lifetime use 47%. Have you vaped in the last 30 days? 34%, so about a third of the kids. And the thing that I do find interesting and also promising is what we see in that column, those bar graphs on the far right. Perceived risk of harm in using vaping materials. Just in the last 2 years, that spiked by like 30%, that we're up to 64% of kids now realize that it's a harm. And when we go to our middle school students, it's the same thing. I mean, I'm very, very happy that, you know, you see it's still very low with our 7th and 8th grade students, as it should be, as far as them using it. But now the fact that we're up to 78% of the kids realize that this is a harm, that, you know, hey, I get involved with this, I'm gonna get something like popcorn lung. I mean, that's a good thing. And you know, the tremendous success that we've had with regard to, you know, smoking cessation programs and, you know, putting the word out there in the last 20 to 30 years. Hopefully we can do that in an expedited manner with vaping. And then kind of interesting data with regard to current use by gender at the high school level. That's also broken down. And the light blue is female students and the darker blue is male. And we can see with regard to drinking and vaping, it's higher with our girls than it is with our boys. And I think we have some other data coming up that speaks to that. Bullying and cyberbullying. If you look at NIPMUC, you see progressively downward trends with regard to reports of instances of bullying, that you were a victim or you have witnessed a victim. Students who report themselves as perpetrators also has decreased. But also, if you look at those columns on the right, also the cyberbullying piece has also decreased consistently during the 6-year span that it was administered. However, if you look at MISCO, the trends are pretty much static data. Bystander behaviors, again, decreases at NIPMUC with regard to, hey, I saw somebody or I heard about somebody being bullied, or I told somebody or I told a non-school adult about bullying. You would expect if the bullying instances are going down, so would some of those behaviors. However, again, at MISCO, and looking at our 6th through 8th graders, it's still pretty much static, consistent with previous year data with regard to the bystander behaviors. Again, looking at the trends of bystander behaviors at NIPMUC, you see, particularly in those first 2 columns, that downward trend about seeing and hearing another student being bullied or trying to stop another student from being bullied. Some really, really nice trends as far as lower values there. And again, consistent with the other data at MISCO, it's pretty much been static. Unintentional injury, this kind of speaks to kids doing things that are harmful or self-injurious, and there's a whole ton of data. I think some of the most fascinating data that I know we work really, really hard at the high school with kids is distracted driving, and particularly kids, you know, talking on their phones, texting on their phones, doing whatever while they're driving. You know, there's some pieces here that I think are of concern. I mean, I think they're societal in nature, but again, this kind of speaks to what we're doing in our wellness curriculum, what we're doing in advisory, and so on. But as far as looking at the number of students that said that they rode in a car while somebody was texting, messaging, or emailing. Probably not a lot of teenage kids emailing in their cars, but anyway. Or they themselves drove while texting or messaging in the past 30 days. It's like 42% of 11th and 12th graders. That's still a really, really high number. Kind of interestingly, of our high school students, what are their perceptions around risk of impaired driving? Kind of a mixed bag of data. On the positive side, the number of kids that report that they rode in a car with somebody who was driving who had smoked pot, or they themselves have drove a car after they had been smoking marijuana. Some nice decreases there, but still you're talking about 34 and 29% respectively. And again, if you look at that bar graph on the far right, the actualization, the perception around, hey, this is a problem, this is super dangerous, is increasing. Then I selected also some mental health data, which I think is key, and I think there probably isn't anything that's super very much a surprise here, but the percentage of our kids at Nipmuc this past year that report that life is very stressful in the past 30 days is about 40%, 39% of our kids. 25% felt sad or hopeless almost every single day for 2+ weeks in the past 12 months. 36% felt nervous, anxious, or on edge. And then some really difficult data around the percentage of kids that have thought about hurting themselves or had contemplated suicide. You see what those numbers are there. So challenging data, but then I think it kind of speaks to what our kids come to school with and some of the challenges that they're facing. When I see this data, I always say, well, okay, how does that compare to, how do Mendon-Upton kids compare regionally and across the state? So I share this slide with you as far as some of this data they have just for our region, and they don't have statewide or national comparisons. But if you look on that far left bar graph, life is very stressful in the last 30 days. You could see it's a little bit more, I think, 39 versus 36%. Nipmuc kids versus other high school age students in the Metro West region. So you can see, for the most part, the data is on parallel for our region and where we have it, the state and national data. As far as our middle school students, again, if you look at that far left, it is troubling to see across those 4 administrations the amount of stress going up. Life is very stressful. Again, in the last 30 days, I think we're up to now 26% of our 7th and 8th graders responding to that. So again, the same comparison as far as our MISCO students to the region, and you can see it's slightly higher for MISCO students than it is regionally. Then what are the sources of stress? Again, you can disaggregate this a bunch of different ways, but you can see consistently the light blue being female students, the darker blue being male students consistently across the board. Our girls are more stressed than our boys, and that definitely is commensurate with the substance abuse data. So again, 77% feel stressed or worried about school issues often or very often. Worry or feel stressed about social issues, 47%. So, interesting snapshot. And then again, if we look at our middle school students, again, our females particularly with regard to school issues, there's some pretty stark differences versus our boys. Then when you talk about our protective factors, and the survey doesn't get into a whole host of them, it isn't super extensive, but it asks a series of questions about how well connected do you feel to the school? I feel close to people in my school. I feel like I'm a part of the school. I'm happy to go to school. Teachers here treat us fairly. I feel like my school is safe, and so on. You can see pretty consistent high marks as far as close to people in the school. 76% of our NIPMUC students, 80% feel like the school is safe, 70% feel like they're part of the school, and so on. You can see that data. How do we compare to the region at the high school level? You can see the darker purple is NIPMUC, the lighter purple is the Metro West region. So it's pretty much on par, but consistently NIPMUC is a little bit higher as far as those survey items around school attachment. Then when you look at the MISCO data, the MISCO data actually shows some decreases with regard to school belonging, school attachment, and some of those percentages are a little bit lower than they are at the high school level. And again, it's the converse of the NIPMUC data, where at MISCO it's slightly lower as far as the school attachment versus comparable middle schools in the Metro West region. As far as trends in adult support, these are questions around, do you have at least one adult in your school community that you could talk to if you have a personal problem, if you have a school problem? Are you speaking to an adult about a problem? And you can see it's pretty much over that 6-year span, pretty consistent. Kind of interesting, hey, I have an adult, but I don't necessarily speak to that adult in the school. Rather, I speak to that adult who's not a member of my school. It's pretty much consistent. And we see that same exact trend at Misco Hill. However, the students, the middle-aged school students reporting that they do have an adult in the middle school setting is lower than it is in the high school setting. So then I think kind of interesting, we talked about this 2 years ago, but asking kids questions about how are you using your time for studying, time for homework, time you're on social media, screen time, and so on. But this year they did a deeper dive into social media, which I thought was very, very interesting, particularly having 2 daughters of my own and seeing some of their own behaviors and some of their own attitudes. I think, again, we look at that graph on the far left thoroughly depresses me when I see sleeps 8+ hours in an average school night. So these are our high school kids. 17% of our girls are getting enough sleep and 21% of our boys. Yeah. So kind of interesting too, spends 3+ hours on homework and studying outside of school on the average day. It's about 36%, so only about 1/3 of our girls and 17% of our boys. Spend 3+ hours online on an average school day, 66% of girls, 59% of boys, but spend 3+ hours of screen time that is not for school or homework on an average school day, and then it's 45% of girls and 50% of boys. I think the sunny side of the street, if you look at that bar on the far right, is participating in volunteer or community service hours. It's 68% and 53%. So our kids are actually doing more of those good things than being online. So we have the same exact data for our middle schoolers in 6 to 8. Thankfully, our middle schoolers are getting a little more sleep. It's about 2/3 of them are getting at least 8 hours of sleep. That does my heart good. Very few of our middle schoolers are spending a lot of homework time. It's like 8% of girls and 6% of boys are spending 3+ hours, which I think is also a really good thing. 6th graders should not be having 3 hours of homework. And you can see very, very lower numbers with regard to the number of hours, or 3+ hours online. And still very healthy numbers for volunteer and community service activities. Something new this year, which I have to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised as far as our kids' attitudes towards social media, was for the most part they like social media. About 2/3 of them say, hey, I'm on social media because I feel more connected with my peers. But this question right here, I become restless or troubled if I am prohibited from using social media. Only 8% of girls and 3% of boys, which I was shocked at. I also was expecting higher numbers. I feel pressure to post things that will be popular. 32% of girls, 15% of boys. And I think that kind of speaks to the pressure to post something on Instagram and get X number of likes and all that nonsense. They also do realize social media keeps me from doing things that are important. 40% of girls and 26% of boys. So at least we do have some students that are self-aware that at times it could be a colossal waste of time.
What is that response though? I become restless or troubled if I'm prohibited?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not addicted to it. I'm not addicted to it.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and you can see the same data for our middle schoolers, except the numbers are even smaller, which you would expect that more of your middle school students are not on social media. Okay? So, I do have to say, I think our, really for lack of a better term, our wellness staff, our counseling staff, our student support services staff really do an outstanding job in combing through this data from year to year and responding directly to the things that we can control, okay? So you can see, I think we're up to now 4 years of doing wellness weeks, both at MISCO and at Nipmuc. We are continuing with partnerships with particularly Family Continuity of Whitensville, but also with Riverside, to try to have those wraparound services for students and their families, continuation of things like social thinking groups. I know we started last year through a lot of the work, particularly with Leslie and organizing folks coming in from UMass Medical Center to do vaping education programs for our students and also for their parents as well. And I know this year we're addressing it vis-a-vis policy as far as consequences and really an educational piece for students who are caught vaping at the high school. We've implemented the Signs of Suicide program, that really addresses that very, very serious issue. I know Maureen's spoken in the past that this last year was part of the cycle in revising our district's health and wellness curriculum and directly using the data around particularly the substance abuse data and the mental health data and incorporating it into content strands in the curriculum. And then as always, I think now, John and Marianne, we're in year 6 or year 7 of our advisory program, so formally reviewing that. This year, our counseling department at Nipmuc put on every single student iPad a list of all of the community resources that are available. If I could jump to this. Let's see. So this is on every single student's iPad so that they know who are the contacts, but also various outpatient, behavioral health and counseling center resources and so on, just as another resource that each and every single student has. We've talked about work that we've done, continued work in the Excel network, or the Excellence in Social Emotional Learning, and a lot of the programming contacts that we've put in place. Implementing PBIS at Nisco Hill based upon the success that we've had at the elementary level. Some of the work around monthly class meetings to recognize positive growth. I know they have started over the last 2 years doing it in 8th grade, but now are building it to 5 through 7 as well. The Bridge program, which we'll talk about at a future school committee meeting, is really a student here, is a program here at the middle school for students at risk. And again, with real connections around wraparound services. And then, as you know, we've had some special events. I know some of you were involved with the screening of If Only. That kind of speaks to the opiate crisis. Some presentations that we've had at the 21st Century Learning Conference just this past January around addiction. And planned for this coming spring is something that CVS is sponsoring in. One Choice Changes Everything, and I believe that is around vaping?
Opioids.
Opioids again.
Prescription
Okay.
drug misuse.
Thank you. So again, it's a lot of different programming that we try to put in place to address these many things that, again, it's something that's always there, it's something that's ongoing, but it's really, again, a key snapshot of how our kids are doing within the community. So I know that's a lot in a short period of time. Does anybody have any questions?
I know you mentioned it briefly there that they've implemented the Signs of Suicide program at Nipok, I think. I know last year was rolling out as a pilot program with a small number of students. I just wondered how that's progressed, what the current status is of it.
So they are, so last year rolled out with our 10th graders last year, so they're current 11th graders. So every adult, I should say, in the building was trained in Signs of Suicide training. So there's going to be a refresher course offered in January for any new faculty or staff members, but also anyone who has a freshman advisor. So this year they're rolling it out to all of our freshman students and offering a refresher course to our current juniors. So that'll be half our school population at that point. So their plan is a grade level per year, just because it's so time intensive for the training, but also, to roll it out. And it is a screening that they do, so it's a training, but it's also a screening, and then ensuring the proper supports after that screening to be sure that they can connect with all those students. Training's in January, and they're rolling it out at the end of January to all current freshmen. And then the refresher for juniors will be later this spring.
Is there any plan to move that program to the middle school?
Probably, yes.
I'm thinking with some of the data that we're getting from the Metro West survey, that's probably something we should be thinking about.
Yeah, and something that I jumped over that I think all 4 of our schools have talked about, and it's actually in our district action plan, is the whole piece around relationship mapping, where you actually do an activity where probably not being very artful in describing it, but you know, you have a list of students, and it could be students on a team, it could be students on a grade level, you could do a whole school, it's however ambitious you want it to be, but doing, say, 4 characteristics about the student that you know that student's parent, or you know something about that student's background, or you know that student's favorite subject, or whatever. And to actually do it in the context of a team, or a grade level, or a whole faculty, or part of the faculty, so you could actually map out, do we have kids that are kind of falling through the cracks, or do we have kids that we just don't know terribly well, you know, for one reason or another. So I think doing those types of activities to address where are some gaps, where we're missing on some kids, is extremely important.
And the bridge program at the middle school, is there a reason why we focused on the middle school and not the high school?
Initially, need as far as the number of kids and the intensity of services needed for some of these students. But do I think it's a need at the high school? Absolutely. Yes, I do.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
All right, any other further questions? All right, so we can move on to old business. Any old business?
I have no old business.
No old business?
All my business is new.
Okay. Correspondence. Can we ask correspondence?
So I sent to you this afternoon correspondence that was sent to John Clements, and Sean, you were carbon copied, as was I. And it is a letter from our accreditation agency, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. And it's in response to the Committee on Public Secondary Schools considering a substantive change report that John and Mary Ann filed back in June to self-report that Nipmuc Regional no longer had a library media specialist. And keep in mind that the standards for accreditation distinctly call for a library media center to be staffed by a qualified professional. So the Committee on Public Secondary Schools has not taken any action in lieu of that substantive change report. However, this coming winter or spring, the committee, a NEA staff person and a committee member will be visiting the school to ascertain what our status is with regard to budgeting to restore this position, but also successful restoration of this position. So I share this correspondence with you just so that you can be cognizant of this is something that is, you know, a very real implication of adequate resources for the schools.
Any questions or concerns? Okay, moving on. Other matters not anticipated by the committee within 48 hours to post the meeting. Any? Seeing none. Future agenda items will be the push-poll surveying update for January 6th, which may be January 16th. How do you want to move that? You want to make that an additional school committee meeting to do the 16th?
It could be, yeah, we could push everything out to the 16th, or, yeah, maybe we could combine the one that is on the 20th to the 16th. You
Yeah,
could do
okay.
either or.
That's right. There's one.
Oh, it's the 27th?
Okay.
Well, part of the problem too is I'd like to keep that event on the 16th streamlined to, you know.
Yeah.
So we'll figure something out to streamline in some way, but probably the event on the 16th should be strictly around the Kaleidoscope Collective.
All right, very good. And then there's a new civics curriculum update for the January 16th And that's all the future agenda items. So I can entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Adjourn.
Not bad, right? You think I had influence, but it was really you guys.